A Tiny Revolution features adults having adult conversations, which means that adult language is probably going to be present, just so you know. Hey there, you're listening to A Tiny Revolution, a podcast about ordinary people living revolutionary lives. My name is Kevin Garcia, and welcome to episode 51. I just got back from the Why Christian Conference, and that's the Why Christian Conference and not the White Christian Conference, which has been kind of confusing when explaining that to people who don't know about the kind of work that I do or the kind of places I tend to go, because I'm definitely not going to go to a white Christian conference because that sounds horrible. Although there were a lot of white people there, but that's another story completely. Anyways, so I just want to say thank you to all my friends who I got to meet out there. Thank you to my friend Matthias Roberts for helping me get there, because Lord knows I'm broke as hell these days. And I'm so thankful. I'm so filled up and encouraged by all the women who spoke and shared their stories. So, and some of them you're actually going to be hearing on the podcast in the next few months. And I'm so stoked to share those conversations with you. Not a lot in the way of announcements. I'll be in Chicago in the first week in April for the Reformation Project Leadership Cohort. Friday night, we're having a live event, a public event where we're going to do worship. We're going to have some amazing speakers just share about their process in becoming affirming and what it is to be a queer Christian living in the world. So yeah, if you're around in Chicago, the event is called Reclaiming and Reforming, a Night of Worship. So check that out on Facebook. Today on my podcast, I'm featuring one of my internet friends, Blake Chastain. Blake Chastain is the host of the Exvangelical podcast, a podcast dedicated to personal stories about living in, leaving, and coming to terms with the messed up subculture of evangelicalism and exploring a wide world of faith, belief, and disbelief outside of it. Blake Chastain is a writer living in Chicago, Illinois with his wife and daughter. Before he lived in Chicago, he grew up in Indiana and the southwest suburbs of Chicago, and he's definitely thoroughly Midwestern. Even though he is thoroughly exvangelical, which is like ex-evangelical, if you will, his family attended the United Methodist churches all throughout his youth, and despite the mainline moniker, much of the pervasive culture he was in was still, and especially in the youth group, like youth group materials and the Christian bookstores that he worked at during high school, it was de facto evangelical. So, and he took his faith seriously and still does, and in fact, that's why he's no longer evangelical. In this interview, we get into a bunch of different discussions about, what the problems with evangelicalism is, the stories that he has encountered through his interviews on Exvangelical, which I'm actually on one of the first episodes, so go back and listen to that, and I will, you can hear me talk about crying on the internet and whatnot. Anyways, and also Exvangelical is also available on the podcast app, so if you haven't listened to that, it's an amazing series, so I would definitely suggest you go check that out. Let me just stop talking and let him tell his story. This is my interview with my friend Blake Chastain. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Exvangelical. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Was that close at least?
That is so good.
Because you always have this delightful, just I'm in a mellow mood. That's like when I think about Blake Chastain, I think fire tweets, mellow mood, and father, husband. Exvangelical, Jesus follower, but not like that.
Oh man, I'm literally blushing and my ears are burning in the headphones.
Well, whoop, there it is. That's you. But for those who don't know Blake Chastain, if you were to give a snapshot of your life, who is Blake Chastain? What does Blake Chastain do? What's Blake Chastain about?
So mostly what I talk about on Twitter and elsewhere is a combination of comics and weird tech complaints and dad jokes, but primarily I talk about evangelicalism and the sort of difficulties that people have leaving evangelicalism. So that is what I tend to talk about the most, and I do that with wonderful people like yourself, because you were a guest on one of my shows, and yeah, that's really what I'm very focused on in particular, is understanding the sorts of things that make people leave evangelicalism in particular, and then sort of what happens to them after that. Like, generally, when I first started out, I sort of had it in my head that it was this sort of like 3-part act. Is like, you have this thing growing up that you are a part of, and then as you get older, you start to reckon with it, and if you can't reconcile your beliefs with it, then you have what I used to sort of term as like a break, or lots of people call it deconstruction. And
Such
then
a fun buzzword that people love to throw around.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and then finally just talk about where people are now. And then obviously there are people that I talk to that have projects that they're working on and causes that they're working for. And I love highlighting that too. So that's me, I guess.
I will say, you're like among like signal boosters on Twitter. You are like one of the biggest ones, I think. Like, all the fucking time, like, you're always boosting my stuff, and I'm a really shitty friend on the internet apparently, because I never boost anybody else. I get tired sometimes, I guess. So maybe this is like, that's what I'll do for Lent. I'll do a mensch for people.
There you go.
Start.
Yeah, I think that's important, because the thing, I mean, I like boosting the people's stories and projects that deserve to get more attention. I mean, I personally don't find myself very interesting, but the people
Really?
that I have...
You don't find yourself interesting? Well, I mean, no. Most people don't find themselves interesting, and that's why you have to have other people like get in your face and say, "Tell me about your life."
That's right. So you're welcome to do that. Now we'll find out if it's any interesting at all.
Yeah, but that's what this is what you came for.
That's right.
Yeah. And the dad jokes. That's what I came for. I don't know what anyone else came here for. Do you have a joke to start?
Yeah, more like social media. Am I right?
I'm done.
Yeah. See, it works. It's even worse or better.
Yeah.
in text.
Jesus wept. Or welt. I can't. For those of you who weren't on our Skype message just a moment ago, which is everybody, I can't type. And also, why in God's name did they put the QWERTY keyboard with the C and the X next to each other? Because I'm always telling people that I'm going to be there in a sex rather than in a sec.
It's just one of those cruel jokes.
Cruel. Okay, redirecting back towards, point the spotlight on you. So you have the Exvangelical podcast. You've been doing that for how long now?
I launched the first episode actually like the week of the Republican National Convention in 2016. So so it was like June or July of 2016 is when I started. So almost 2 years now.
Wow.
That feels since then.
Jesus. At the time, I remember having conversations with people about the political climate at the time. I was like, don't worry, Hillary's going to win.
Right.
And, all of our, our own foolishness was highlighted in that. You've been doing the Exvangelical podcast. You've had everybody from like Diane Butler Bass to like Joe Schmoes like me and a whole bunch of other amazing humans. In these conversations, the thing I really enjoy is that it's never just one cookie cutter story. There are like themes that have emerged and like are like pretty not kind of common within like kind of like every single exvangelical story. But from your perspective, what are the big themes that you've seen come out through asking people about their life and their story through Exvangelical? Right.
Yeah. And I totally agree. That is something that you see a lot of. You see certain themes come out, and what I do like about talking to people in sort of a long form show is that you see the themes, but you also get those very individual particularities about their story and what makes it human and what makes it personal for them. That being said, the sort of themes that I've seen are There are a lot of people that have been forced out of evangelicalism because of their sexuality, or because they are, or because of their gender, and that they don't toe the line or fit those sorts of narratives that are so strikingly rigid in evangelicalism. Like if you're not man enough, if you're not woman enough, or if you are called to preach as a woman, well, then I hope you really enjoy teaching Sunday school, you know?
To babies only.
Yeah, because and female babies probably, you know, because, you know, there can't be anyone in authority over a man and all of that sort of stuff. Then there's also a lot of cognitive dissonance that happens, like people that really start to question things around the college years and everything, and something that people might know from like something they may have heard in youth group, or heard if they took like some sort of Bible courses at a Christian colleges. Like a lot of people say, like, you got to get them before they're 18. You know, that's actually a thing that some church leaders say.
Really?
Yeah, and it's because there's like a drop off, at least within evangelicalism. You know, because if you don't get them before they're 18, then, you know, they'll go to college, they'll have these life experiences, they'll whatever. And
so that makes my skin crawl.
Right? Yeah, it's pretty manipulative. Like,
yeah.
So there are all those sorts of things, and I think that because I've had a lot of people on that are my age or younger, I think there's a lot of people that are very much still dealing with purity culture and all that that entails, and just how formational and damaging in so many ways that that like youth group culture in the 90s and 2000s was. And it wasn't always necessarily that it was something like domineering, even though that is an option, that could be something. But I could even speak, you know, even from my own personal experience, it wasn't always like the expectations of a youth pastor being put on us to like be perfect or whatever. Oftentimes it was just us being assholes to each other, or like holding one another to like these purity levels that
like impossible standards.
Right. Yeah. And so
was it the whole don't touch yourself and don't touch girls because then you're going to be sinful, and then you know the use napkin thing. No purple, no purple in the church, man. Right. And like how far is too far? Like always trying to establish the boundaries and understanding what is appropriate and what is not. And then if you ever like crossed one of those lines, you were like shamed profusely for it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, those are just a handful of the things that have come up time and again. And the thing about this is that, I think one of the reasons why it's a show that someone that has lived this experience can relate to is because a lot of this stuff is like just like this shorthand we all have, you know, right? Like where were you when Amy Grant got divorced?
Yes,
you know, like stuff like that. Like people, those are cultural touchstones, you know, like people know what you mean, and it's crazy.
Yeah. Or like, you know, when you talk about the music you listened to growing up, or the music you didn't listen to growing up.
Right.
Like, you know Emily Joy, right? You've talked to her.
Yeah. Yep.
I often will make like 90s or like early 2000 references, and like she doesn't get them because basically her teen years were stolen from her. And so,
yeah.
You know, or like, you know, like any number of interesting things, or like if you like, you did grow up in that era, and like me and a bunch of my friends were out last night, and we were just singing early because we had like 4 or 5 drinks apiece. Like we were all singing. I think we were singing like, there's from Avalon, for as long as I shall live, I will testify.
Yes.
Like everyone who just like knows like these like Christian pop tunes that honestly though, like for someone like myself who is still like in the church and still does worship music, I really love those songs because they're like honestly the least problematic of any worship songs that we've had in a long time, if we're being frank. But that's probably another podcast for another time.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if I heard God of Wonders right now, I'd probably get goosebumps.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, it is. It's a good song. Like it's literally.
I mean, I don't know, like if like from a critical standpoint, if it's a quote unquote good song, but it definitely brings up a lot of feels for me.
Oh, so many feels.
Yeah. Sure. Do you ever, being that like there's all these different cultural touchstones and like different things that we all kind of can relate to as like folks on the other side of, or even in the midst of deconstruction, do you do you miss it? Because I do sometimes. Which is a good question. It's a complicated question.
Yeah. So I do think that sometimes like there is an assuredness in feeling like the world is sort of ordered in a particular way, and that centers you as a person, and not only giving you like a center, like a individual center, but also like a universal center, in that like the universe is oriented towards you and towards your actions. And that can be really good. It's just that a lot of times when you, it's those moments when you sort of touch against the boundary of that, that is what I don't miss, you know? So one of the things that sort of led to my own, I had a very tumultuous sort of emotional and like an intellectual reckoning in college. I went to a Christian college in Indiana, and my first full week of college was when 9/11 happened.
Oh my God.
And I was a double major because the history department really pushed this double major thing for whatever reason. So I was a double major in history and biblical literature. And so in history, one of the key professors was very dogmatic about his particular view of history, and he taught like a biblical Christian worldview is what he called it. And then
okay.
Yeah. And so like I am very thankful for that professor, because he in many ways taught me to think critically, but I disagreed with him pretty much across the board. He gave me those tools, but then I used them to dismantle his stuff.
As one does.
And concurrently with that is when I started learning about Greek, and a lot of the sort of modern biblical scholarship, and just how deeply complex even just the New Testament is, even just from a textual perspective.
Yeah.
And so what happened is that I started to realize just how subconsciously I had taken the Bible literally, like word for word, inerrant, you know. It wasn't something, I grew up going to like United Methodist churches, so it wasn't like that was front and center. But evangelicalism had sort of, you know, seeped into a lot of churches and things like that. And like every like youth group thing was provided by some sort of evangelical group, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of made it into the water, and then I had this huge just faith crisis in my sophomore year. Like, okay, the Bible isn't literal. Like, Paul might not have written this. He might, you know, like all these things. And then I disagree with these political stances that are being taught from a Christian perspective, quote unquote, like.
Yeah, quote unquote Christian perspective.
Yeah. So all those things happen. And then obviously I'm like a hormone-addled teen too. So it's not like.
Well, you had hormones. It's crazy.
Yeah,
can you believe it? I thought Christians didn't have hormones.
Yeah.
Or urges or desires.
Yeah, and like we weren't like weren't allowed to watch rated R movies and this legalistic stuff on top of it. So like that, I went into that and then started hitting all these boundaries. And it was really.
Like, do you ever wonder why it was always like rated R movies, like PG-13 movies, even if they were like super duper violent, because there wasn't sex in the movie, it was okay?
Yeah. Can I give you an example from my college?
Please.
Okay, so my sophomore or junior year, they started individually approving certain rated R movies.
Oh my God, really?
They had 3 grades. So A was you could 3 grades for any submitted movie. A was that it could be watched anywhere without professorial approval or discussion. B was like a professor had to facilitate a discussion afterwards, and C was denied.
Wow. Also, I didn't go to a Christian university, so like whenever I hear things like this, I'm just like, what the actual fuck?
Right. Yeah. So here's the tangible examples. Passion of the Christ, which is obscenely violent. It's intended to be that way.
A rating, I assume.
A rating.
God.
The Matrix, A rating.
Really? Okay.
The Matrix Reloaded, B rating because of the sex scene.
Okay.
And then what was the other one? Oh, the other one that was a surprise A rating. Well, surprising. It was Braveheart, because all the violence could be akin to spiritual warfare.
What? What in Sam Hill?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that was definitely the case. So, I mean, that's the sort of stuff that is really painful for someone that's sort of like entering adulthood, and
to not have any autonomy over yourself.
Right. And so when you run into all those barriers and you like are trying to become like a young scholar or a young educated person, and you run into
like a human
things,
in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Then like all these things that run counter to you and are imbued with divine authority. Like you are forced into this crossroads that is like, once you get on the other side, you realize that it's artificial, but when you're in the midst of it, it's life and death.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's just such a critical thing. And some people can sort of slough that off and like move on with their life. And like those people, like all power to them, and
then good for them too.
Right. But for some people, it's like existential crisis time. It's like, have you been watching The Good Place?
I've heard of it. I've heard a couple reviews. It's on my list of things to watch.
Yeah. There's one character that's just completely adult, like just angst-ridden, and has trouble making even the simplest choices. And that's the sort of person that I was.
Yeah.
So like it took me a long time to sort of go through that, and then like later on, I discovered like something called creation care theology, and that sort of provided this synthesis of the different things I was feeling, like liberal politics and an affirming view of the creation and of the creator. And that was one of the things that helped me sort of move further beyond just feeling like I was denying my birthright or something.
Yeah. Wow. And we could take this in like 20,000 different directions. So just so like because I love talking story. So you hit kind of crisis of faith mode. You encounter creation care theology. Fast forward, you're married. See, you have a wife.
Yes, sí, una esposa.
Oh, qué bueno. ¿Y un bebé, sí?
Sí, yep.
¿Cuántos años tiene?
5.
Oh, un petit bébé.
Yes.
No, it's French. So at what point did you realize that maybe like it wasn't just you who was experiencing this kind of, walk towards evangelicalism, or like transition towards exvangelicalism, as it were?
Yeah. So I what I started to realize just over time, I had one of my best friends ever is I went to college with him. He went on to a bit more. He went on and did some academic work in the area, and then really luckily he moved to Chicago too, and we spent most of our time together. And so like we were sort of processing these things together. Yeah. So we both have lived in the same area, and we sort of had been experiencing a lot of the same sort of struggles about evangelicalism and sort of our shifting ideas about theology and politics and social stuff and everything. And then over time, like I started to realize that even the people that I stayed connected to from my college, that I knew even loosely on Facebook, like we had all sort of liberalized and lived these sort of broader lives than what we sort of even would have imagined back then. And yeah, I basically, like, I don't know, sort of pitched the idea to, or asked a friend what they thought of the idea, and asked my wife Emily and some other people, and like the idea sort of resonated, and I ended up sort of sitting on it for a little while and I had other things going on, and then but then the idea just sort of didn't go away. This was like I ended up
It was the thing that just kept you up at night.
yeah. And so I mean, and it was like this thing that always bothered me. Like I ended up writing I went to school part-time, and I got my master's like in religious and ethical studies, and I like
Ooh, so fancy.
yeah. So it was like I always kept coming back to religious topics. Like it was just sort of this thing that I couldn't avoid. And I wrote my thesis on creation care and evangelical politics and all this different stuff. So like even though I no longer identified that way, like I recognized their sort of pull and their influence and things. And
yeah, of course.
But then seeing this sort of lived out, even amongst my friends that I knew tangentially or that I knew well, like we were different people, and it wasn't always easy. And it wasn't easy to navigate personal relationships, and it wasn't easy to navigate church stuff when you felt like you sort of had to hide parts of yourself, I guess. And I think
Yeah. Yo, like it just hits real hard home for me, because like, especially the part about hiding parts of yourself, which like there's I guess it's interesting for me because like now, like I've tried to avoid like not being an evangelical for, if that, I don't even know if that makes sense, because I like evangelicalism is what raised me. The expression that of Christianity, like that most closely looks like what I'm doing, is kind of evangelicalism, but it's only kind of like in the worship style and the way that we do church, or at least organize our church body. But then like in every other way, it's like not the same. And it's really hard, I think, because the evangelical identity that we had growing up is not just a matter of like your religious affiliation, but like it's a matter of like the culture you come from,
right,
in some ways.
Yeah.
Like it's a matter, like I remember like Wednesday night, but like Wednesday night potluck dinners at church.
Right.
And like when somebody in the church died, like everybody rallied around them. And when it was like, when it was football season of all fucking things, like,
yeah,
there's so many like things to do, people to go over, like a community was built into that. And so to leave that, it's not just a matter of like changing your religious affiliation. It's like you're losing a whole fucking community,
right,
like your home, your people.
Right.
And
yeah,
and that's what like makes transitioning out of it such a difficult thing.
Right. And that's exactly it. Like you lose, if you, and pardon me for using this language, but sometimes it does include an element of actually like coming out in this weird way. Like that's not the same in any way as when someone comes out
I get you,
sexually, but that's the sort of sensitivity to otherness that is there in evangelicalism. So like you could surprise someone by saying you're a Democrat, or you could surprise someone by saying you're for gun control, or you could surprise someone for saying you don't believe in the Bible or the Bible's literal translation or whatever. or that you don't read the ESV, or like.
Is that a point of contention with some people?
No, I don't think so. But like, I mean, so the ESV is, like Wayne Grudem was involved in like stay the fuck away, but like, it's like a more conservative and more. They took the NASB and added complementarianism and some other garbage to it, like, and just baked it into a translation of the Bible that's very popular now.
Things I did not know. Wow.
Yeah. So I mean, it's very, very big in like certain denominations or church circles that are very heteronormative and complementarian and all that stuff. So in that regard, like what you're saying is you run the risk of losing your community. And that is something that is also like a common thread, is that if someone is themselves and is unapologetic for it, they could lose their community. Even if they have a damn good reason, like,
yeah.
We lost a church community once because we told the leading pastor at the time that we were egalitarian, and that's pretty like.
That's it.
So it's low stakes, but it's also table stakes. You know what I mean? So like, it's low stakes because we're a straight couple. We're white. It's like all those things are low stakes, but it's table stakes also because you're not gonna freaking tell my daughter what she can and can't do. So it's like, especially in the name of God, you're not going to do that. You're not going to say that to my wife either. So, but that was also table stakes for them. So like, they didn't kick us out, but it was made pretty clear that it was not a question that was up for debate. And then we lost a community, and that was painful.
It's so interesting to me because like, that to me seems like one of those issues that that shouldn't be central to the Christian faith,
right?
Even for me as someone who's like, quote unquote progressive and blah blah blah, all that shit. When I'm thinking about like, I remember growing up, or at least like when I was like rediscovering faith in my Pentecostal tradition that I was in,
mm-hmm.
like I remember we would often talk about like things that were essential to being in Christian community and things that were non-essential, and like that to me seems like such a stupid thing to like isolate somebody in your community over. Like, so what if like they believe differently,
right? Yeah.
But for people who are at the centers of power like that, you say that my wife is equal to me, like people fucking lose their shit.
Right. Yeah. And that I agree. Like, it's not, it does not question anything in the Apostles' Creed. Like, if that's your measuring stick, like, okay, guess what? Then nothing in there that says that my wife has to submit to me. There's nothing in there that says women are subservient to men. You're getting that shit from 1 Timothy and putting that above Jesus' example of elevating women in so many passages. Like Mary.
Isn't that so interesting?
Yeah. Mary was the first witness of the resurrection. I mean, there are so many examples of counterexamples, that it's.
Do you think there's something that like, just touching on that real quick? Like I think this is something that I've been like kind of like wrestling with myself lately around like my relationship to the Bible, especially some of the epistles that I read. Because like I do this daily devotional for my Patreon subscribers or Patreon supporters, and I often find like in the letters from Paul, I have an issue with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't like reading with them because I don't think that his theology is good sometimes.
Right.
I'm like, I think in some ways he was a genius, but in other ways, like he put so much emphasis on the death of Christ and the cross that I think we don't talk about the life of Christ enough.
Yeah, I'm not like a New Testament scholar or anything, but I agree. Like Paul makes me uncomfortable, like in a lot of ways, and there's also lots of scholarship out there about which things he actually wrote and which things he didn't. And there are instances like it, there are some that might be pseudepigraphal, meaning that people wrote it under his name and sort of in a way that, because that was...
That's a $3 word, pseudepigraphal.
Yeah. The other one is that he may have employed something called an amanuensis, which is essentially sort of like a secretary that he might have dictated to, and that may have changed his wording or some other stuff. Like there's so much scholarship, and that was one of the things in college that was sort of overwhelming, is that like,
wow,
my professor was this sort of, he was just like this infinite library of knowledge in his head, and like he would just sort of throw off the stuff that would screw me over, like mess with me forever. And then anyways, things like that would happen.
And what's maddening to me is that like general Christian population, no fucking clue about any of that. Right.
And that's the thing that like that's the thing that's crazy. People do, like, they'll harass you on Twitter saying, they believe in the word. Like, okay, it's been around for 2,000 years. Which school of thought are you applying to the word? Is it
and they're saying the word, I believe it. It's what it says. The Bible is the Bible. It's black and white.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then
it's like the Bible is also Hebrew. It was written in Hebrew and Greek.
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, and so it's
maddening.
Yeah. So Paul in particular is problematic to me. I think he has a lot of misogyny in several of his letters. I mean, the pastoral epistles is what First and Second Timothy and Titus. Those are the things that like conservative evangelicals run haywire with, and used to subordinate women and enable patriarchy. Like, just call it what it is. I mean, but then there's also Paul in Galatians and says, in Christ there is neither Hebrew nor Greek, male nor female, all of those things that there's a level.
It's one of those things where it's like, I feel like kind of like every great theologian throughout history, it's like in many ways they were ahead of their time, and sometimes even timeless in their writing, and then other ways they were very much bound by their time.
Yeah, definitely.
Because like I look at someone like, I love Lutheranism and I love Lutheran theology, and then I also recognize that Martin Luther was like an anti-Semite and like not great in other ways.
Yeah, he didn't like poor people. Yeah, he definitely, and he was protected by a local regent and everything, so like he had a lot of privilege.
So it's one of those things where like Martin Luther, brilliant in some ways, no, not great in many other ways. Yeah. So it's and I think that like in 100 years, when they look back at like the work that we're doing now, they're going to look at us and say in some ways they were very much ahead of their time, and in other ways they were very much bound by their time.
Making dad jokes on Twitter,
Yeah, bound by the spirit of the age.
That's right.
Oh my god. Jeez. One thing I would love to I talked about is like I guess we kind of talked about this already in some ways. Let me ask you about this. So you've been doing the Exvangelical podcast for a while, and for a while you had your closed Facebook group, and then you opened it up to anybody who just wanted to join it. Mm-hmm. And what I've discovered by joining it myself is like there is such an interesting and powerful community and like thriving community of people who are like just asking questions, very simple questions that are like deeply profound, and they'll get like 100 comments on it. Like the one I think I saw today was just like, if you've walked away from a church, would there be anything that would bring you back to a church? Mm-hmm. And just like a litany of stories and opinions, and like, what's it been like to kind of foster and to use a evangelical or to pastor a community like this? I know I hate myself too.
No, it's okay. So yeah, it's been very interesting. It did start off as sort of like a much smaller group that was primarily just people that had signed on to early Patreon stuff, and then I had been discussing it just privately with Chris Stroop, who's been on the show a few times and is known on Twitter and elsewhere for Empty the Pews and a number of different campaigns that he started to criticize evangelicalism and authoritarianism and a lot of other things. And he's been a very good partner in that way. He recently said that he's Magneto and I'm Professor X, and that those are sort of the roles that we sort of fall into. But it's been very interesting because there are with the Facebook group, it ballooned very quickly once it opened. It went from 70 to 800 to now we're close to 2,000. And just sort of exponential growth. We've added we have a total of 6 mods and admins right now, and we're going to be adding some more. And it's been really rewarding and also challenging in different ways. One of the things that sort of underpins it is that the name, like Exvangelical, aside from being sort of punny and all of that, and it also the term, to as I understand it and as I sort of promote it, is that it defines you based on a prior relationship. So you are an ex-convict, or you're like your ex-wife or whatever. So it defines it based on that, but it does not define what state you're at now. So in that regard, it's sort of like this ecumenical or interfaith sort of thing, where there are some people that are no longer evangelical but might be Episcopalian or agnostic or atheist. And sometimes those things will lead to comments that can be difficult to sort of moderate or administrate. But for the most part, people are very engaging and very kind towards one another, and that's been the most rewarding part of it, is that we do take this sort of cultural shorthand that we all have, and we are able to find this common ground of understanding that this is something we no longer endorse, that we sort of repudiate this, and we can find common ground in that. But we also can celebrate our diversity. And that, to me, is it is like sort of this fine line to walk, because it's not a church. Like this is something different than a church. Yes, there is a religious element to it, but I'm not trying to indoctrinate you. Like that, to me, it's not about whether you believe a certain way. One of the taglines that I have that I sort of fall back to is that I like wholeness over holiness. Like I don't care whether I don't care what you believe about Jesus in this moment. And I just care that you feel whole, or that you're on your way to that. And to me, that's more important than whatever your theological belief is right now. So yes, we do have flare-ups. Like it's a large group. There's a lot to manage. That's why we're seeking to add more admins and everything. But by and large, people are welcome there, and we have very clear guidelines of what is acceptable behavior and what cannot be. We're
not going to tolerate it.
Yeah, we're not going to we affirm all gender expressions. If people make their pronouns known, you will be expected to use them, and like a number of other things, but primarily is that there's no proselytizing, there's no talking down, there's no going after or questioning someone's sexuality or gender, and those are the sort of sacrosanct things there. And then otherwise, let's all talk and have a discussion. And I think it's been rewarding to make that available. I don't think it would have become the force it is if I, tried to continue it as the Patreon thing. So I'm still thinking of a better way to enable that, but I'm happy to have been able to find other people that have
Yeah.
different sort of experiences than I do, and have different even current beliefs than I do, and they have a role in helping to create that place and administer that place. And that iron sharpens iron, right? So
Yeah. Come on, biblical
that's
references.
right. I can still pull them out.
Let me tell you what, the majority of the time, like, I speak in like Old Testament biblical references because, as we all know, we had to learn it through Sunday school.
Yeah.
And that is why I will probably never ever get married unless someone can like get all of my references. um, okay, let me ask you something quite topical
Okay.
because I'm curious to know. So, Billy Graham Sr., God rest his soul, just passed from this world and on to the next, and is probably hanging out with, all the civil rights movement leaders in heaven, if heaven's an actual place, like of like actual like cognition. Um, uh, there's like definitely like a really interesting discussion happening on the Twitterverse around like the life of Billy Graham Sr. It was Billy Graham, right?
Yeah, it was Billy Graham.
Okay. Thought so. I'm just like, wait a second. I want to make sure because
No,
Franklin Graham, his son, is the idiot. Also, people, if you didn't know, follow Franklin Graham Redacted.
Oh my gosh, so good.
Oh my god, that's one of my favorite projects that you have. It is so
Oh no,
funny.
that's not me. That's Jackson Dame.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jackson. If you're listening, I apologize.
Yeah, that's Jackson's. He does a great
It's
job.
all you white people. You all look the same to me.
That's
just kidding.
fair.
So Billy Graham, the teacher of all teachers of evangelicalism for the past generation, died. And like there's an interesting like correlation of people saying like, we can mourn his death without making him out to be some sort of like martyr or some sort of saint either. I don't know, do you have any thoughts about the life of Billy Graham and like approaching like when someone problematic dies?
Yeah, I don't really. I can give a hot take or something. I don't really know him.
Hot take.
I don't really.
You don't know him personally?
I don't know him
wow.
personally, and I don't know his sort of record as well as other people do. I know that some people are giving him credit for sort of owning up to his mistakes to a degree in regards to Watergate. Like in his sort of, he backed Nixon and things like that. But then once sort of Watergate happened, then he sort of owned up to that and then basically retracted himself from politics. I don't know whether I don't know. There are a number of things on his record that are not great. I mean, he did express disappointment about the fact that the UN stuff doesn't open with prayer and things like that, and had some other derogatory comments. Even with the Watergate thing, I think he might have been recorded or somehow reported that he said derogatory things regarding Jewish people. Like, I mean,
Whoa.
Don't quote me on that, but I have seen mention of that. I do think though that like this sort of impulse towards like hagiography, which the lives of the saints and sort of sainting someone right after they die, like I'm not sure the value of that in this day and age. Like I'd rather just go biography over hagiography because so many things are documented now. Like even within the record that people publish now, or even if you looked at someone's Twitter feed from 5 years ago, you'd probably find something that.
Lord, don't look at mine.
You know what I mean?
Don't look at mine from 6 weeks ago.
Right.
Shit.
Yeah. So I mean,
don't look at any of my tweets. Go unfollow me.
So I mean, that's sort of the sort of mind frame I'm thinking of, and that's a really like I don't know, like a topical example, but I mean, it's sort of emblematic of the fact that so many things are documented. We can't just saint someone right away. We can't say that they did not have foibles or faults. And especially someone that has such a role in evangelicalism and in this moment, that like the role of evangelicalism and getting us to this place culturally, they have a lot of responsibility to bear. And he was a key figure of that.
Yeah.
A lot of my like knowledge and research into the religious right is pretty much from the 70s forward. And he wasn't as present in that as he was previously. Like he sort of receded into the background, and Jerry Falwell and company took center stage. But
God, why are they a thing?
yeah, this is Jerry Falwell Jr.'s dad. But
they're both dicks,
yeah,
as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, senior's gone. So
and not even in the fun kind, you know what I'm saying? Heyo. Let me ask you one more question real quick. This is something that people have a lot of interesting takes on. Christianity, or just like evangelical, or like American evangelicalism and Christianity in the next, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years. Like, where do you think it's headed? Do you think it's going to be like this super decentralized, we're going to kind of like, all the mega churches are going to shut down. We're going to just have house churches and smaller faith communities that just are a network of little house churches? Or do you think it's just kind of like going to morph into something different? Or I don't know. Do you have any thoughts?
I'm not. Well, I don't know that I could predict the future on this, but I think that
you're not psychic.
No, I'm
This
not.
is so confusing for me.
So some of the more troubling to me sort of statistics are that like church attendance is declining everywhere except within sort of evangelical or conservative churches. So the sorts of people that a church might want to reach may not be within their reach anymore. They might be, but the loudest voices and the people that have had the loudest voices for almost half a century has been evangelicalism. They were the ones that built colleges. Well, the colleges sort of happened in the 20s, but then like they built colleges and they built radio stations and they built publishing companies and they built this entire network of influence. And then the mainstay or the mainline denominations, they kept on keeping on, and the evangelicalism sort of stopped engaging with them. Like, I don't know about you, but like at my Christian college, we didn't talk about, people like Karl Barth or Paul Tillich or James Cone.
Well, I also went to a school for music, so we didn't talk about any of these. We were talking about Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yeah, but I mean, even like within your church stuff, like were those names that were ever mentioned,
no.
or did you come across it like later in life when you were sort of engaging what you might call like progressivism or like progressive Christianity or whatever it is? Like those sorts of...
It's all later, within the past 2 years for me.
Yeah. So like those things are not, they're a whole separate world. And I do think, I think that the mainline churches have something to say to the culture, and they have a way to exist in like a pluralistic religious landscape. Because like, I can speak for myself. I started attending Episcopal services shortly after the election and my wife and I, like sort of by surprise or by accident, like after a major sort of church hurt thing, we ended up finding a great community, and we ended up starting to really resonate with Episcopalian services. Like they're very theologically dense and they're socially accepting, and there's a lot of great things about it. And I think if someone's looking for a tradition like that, then it's there, but I don't know how to overcome the damage that evangelicalism has done to Christianity in general. And this,
God, that's a fucking word right there.
And so so to me that's like, it's really, and I mean, I am dead set against evangelicalism continuing. I mean, I have an entire project dedicated to talking about church trauma that people experience because of their experience within evangelicalism. But are there healthy expressions of Christianity? Yes, there are. Are there other healthy ways to be spiritual or non-religious? Yes, there are. And I do think that there's a place for established churches that can speak to that and can provide those spiritual needs. And I think that there are people doing the hard work, but I think it's going to be hard work. I don't think that it's going to be something that will be like an overnight sort of success, you know?
Yeah.
So it's not that it doesn't, I'm not like vehemently anti-Christian or anything like that, but I am against the sorts of Christianity that evangelicalism represents. So I get very particular in this, like, you know, I'll get in the weeds, but I don't. I'm very happy to know some of the people that are doing the hard work and that are laudable things.
Yeah.
And I'd include you in that, Kevin. Like,
oh,
you're doing good work. You know, you are doing good work. So keep doing it.
Thanks, Blake. I appreciate that. Either that or all of us on this side of the aisle are going to hell. So who can say? I guess we'll find out. And that was my conversation with my friend Blake Chastain. You can connect with Blake across social media with the handle @BrChastain, and also be sure to follow, like, and subscribe to his podcast Exvangelical, which can be found across the internet at ExvangelicalPod or at exvangelicalpodcast.com. A Tiny Revolution is supported in part by my friends Sonia Bowen, Christopher Breen, Michael Vasquez, Jackie Taylor, Arian Johnson, Gary Richardson, Mark Ramsey, Bethany Bolin, Diana Kyle, Chelsea Anderson, Shannon McKinsey, Claire McClure, and a bunch of other amazing humans from across the country and the world who believe that revolutionary conversations like this one are important and needed in the world. If you think this conversation was something that was good for you, is good for the movement overall, I would love for you to become a supporting partner. And how you do that is going to patreon.com/thekevingarcia to learn how you can support the work that I'm doing, which is creating podcasts, videos, and blogs about the queer and progressive Christian experience. It's been a really incredible thing to see how many people are, you know, finally getting in touch with their own personal stories through hearing the stories of other people. And I honestly think that's why we're going to change the world, my friends. So if you have a couple bucks a month, I would really appreciate your support. Again, go to patreon.com/thekevingarcia to learn how you can become a sustaining partner today. I think that is all from me. I am so thankful to be a part of this community, especially after this weekend. Be on the lookout for a really cool video coming to the YouTube channel about my time at White Christian and a couple of other trips I've taken recently to Denver. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, go over and do that. You can find that through thekevingarcia.com/YouTube, and it has a link right there that'll send you over to the YouTube channel. If you haven't already, go ahead and leave a rating for this show in the iTunes store. It allows us to get in contact with other people, and it helps the show reach a wider audience. The more reviews we have, the more people we can inspire with revolutionary stories. I really like you. I think you're dope. I think you're fun. And I'm excited for the next phase of what's happening in our lives. So if you've got something hard going on, I just want to let you know you're not alone in that, okay? Keep going, keep striving, and eventually, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually things are going to be okay. Remember how loved you are, all right? All right, go see your therapist, drink some water, take a nap, go walking outside, go eat something delicious, get a massage if it's in your budget, get your friend to give you a back rub if it's not in your budget. Go see a movie by yourself. Take yourself on a date. You deserve it, honey. Okay, I'm done talking. I love you. I'll talk to you next week. This has been another episode of A Tiny Revolution. My name is Kevin Garcia, and I'll talk with you soon. Bye.